See, we plan ahead. That way we don't do anything right now.
I think about lots of things. Now, why don't we not stand here talking about them and get down to doing them?
To begin.
Clytus, I'm bored.
To begin.
What plaything can you offer me today?
How to start.
Hello and welcome to The First Syllable. I am Professor Robert E.G. Black, and this might be the season finale. The show went on hiatus 2 years ago, whenever that was, and then came back this year. And I've been doing it consistently every week, and it doesn't get a lot of listeners, but I don't care. It forces me to sit down and try to make the things I'm hoping or planning to write make sense. This past season of this, I've talked about Death, Death, Death. I've talked about Four Finger Discount. I've talked about Chase Two Rabbits. That is a slasher screenplay, a novel I wrote a draft of, and a novel that is probably... It's the next thing I'm writing. But I think I need to take a little break because the fall semester starts this week. And I think the last few episodes have been a little repetitive because Chase Two Rabbits is different for me because I have to plot out a lot of it in detail before I start writing, which I don't normally do. Normally, at best, I'll have some bullet points that I have to hit and some character sketches. I got that. The problem is it's a detective story, which means the bullet points of the actual plot and the bullet points of the story are not in the same order. And it's hard for me to figure out how does Lee find out about, he'd find out about I should finish the sentence. How does he find out about the robbery at Stormrider Keep? It would be in the papers, obviously. Or maybe it wouldn't. It's actually more complicated. Stormrider Keep is essentially the castle where the High King lives. It's at the center of the city of Aedith. The capital, or the citadel? What would you call it? I don't know what you call it in a medieval-ish society. The castle that used to be the center of Gardea, it used to be where the king lived, used to be a castle can't even say the sentence. There used to be a castle called Faraway. Faraway floated up in the clouds above a mountain called No Top. In a story I started but never finished, I think I've read part of it here several episodes ago, it was a story called Song of Fell Faraway. Something happened connecting an incident in the present to an incident in the past, and it caused Faraway to fall out of the sky, killing almost everyone in it. The political center of Gardea shifted from Faraway Castle and the city of Capital to the city of Aedith, which already was the largest city in Gardea, and possibly the largest city in all of the continent of Eleuthia. Yeah, it would be. Thousands of years ago it wouldn't have been, because Orm had bigger cities, but Orm destroyed itself. Anyway, Stormrider Keep is the castle at the center of Aedith, and it is where the king, the royal family, and everything operates and lives. Now, someone broke in, ostensibly to commit some sort of political dissident act of vandalism, but while they were there, one of the people in the party also stole something. The vandalism might get reported in the newspaper. I don't think the robbery would. So then the question becomes, how does Lee... This is just one question I have to figure out. And I'm doing it on an app called Miro, which I can do like post-its and move them around and connect them with strings and all this other stuff. At the moment it's just post-its in a row, but the post-its have colors depending on what they are. How does Lee find out that this act of vandalism at Stormrider Keep that made the papers connects to the people he's investigating? How does he find out that there was a robbery? How does he find out that Skit Donnerjack is involved at all? How does he find out that Heinfroth's boys are involved? Interrupting from editing because, here's a for instance. As I'm editing this little thing where I'm asking the question about how Lee finds out, there's an easy way for him to find out some of the details in that Skit, or more likely one of Heinfroth's boys in this case being two people that work for a local sort of mob boss named Heinfroth, got arrested. If they got arrested, that means there are names attached to the robbery, there's someone for Lee to talk to. He can try to get information out of them and end up finding out that Celia, Frankie, or Skit were involved, and then through them figure out the others. This is why it's helpful to say this stuff out loud, not just put it on post-its. Yeah. Anyway, back to the questions. You should know immediately that Celia is involved because she's kind of the femme fatale villainess of the story. The obvious one, not the only one. How does he know that Frankie's involved? Or does he find out because maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe he knows Frankie was involved from the start. Maybe the valet tells him. Togi Hasakonic has hired Lee to locate his 2 daughters so that he can, this is complicated. Essentially, he wants to get new fingers from them because their repository for resurrection has been damaged. That's a whole complicated lore thing in itself. You haven't been listening to this show. Togi's valet, who has a clockwork, means he's sort of a robot, is more concerned on a personal level for them because he knows that someone is blackmailing Beatty, and he knows that Frankie has been involved with some questionable people. So maybe the valet already suspects, maybe it'd be in the news, what group was involved in the vandalism or claimed responsibility, and he knows that Frankie is involved with them. That gets me an in. How, eventually, does Lee figure out that there was also a robbery? Because this robbery connects everything back to Celia, to Heinfroth's boys, to Skit, back to Roland and Claire, and Azaran, who lives in the same house as Lee. The story connects back to people that Lee knows personally. It connects to political leaders. It's just very complicated. Trying to outcomplicate the big sleep, which is hard, because that plot is complicated. And part of the plot is inspired by the big sleep. The 2 daughters, the rich guy who hires them. I just had slightly different reasons, but some similarities on purpose. While Lee narrates in a way that the story is not about him, it's also me telling a story about Lee, because Lee fascinates me as a character, even though I invented him. Kind of like Odds in Four Finger Discount, which might be just how I know when I'm ready to write, is when that main character is fascinating me so much that I need to put them onto paper, or into Word. The thing is, the next few episodes will probably just be repetitive. They'd be me talking about changes I made to my Miro sheets, and out of context, they'd be confusing. So I think I'm going to take a little break and come back once I have a more concrete idea to describe. I'll also do one-offs if I'm inspired to talk about something unconnected, because that happens. And then I'll only have the one podcast a week, which is Groundhog Day Project. I will continue that one every week. I still wish I could get back into doing things on YouTube, but I haven't had time, and it feels like there's more of a setup than I have. And it's fall semester. Starts tomorrow for me. I have classes 4 days a week. It shouldn't be too bad once I'm into it, but getting into the flow of a new semester can be a lot. But I will keep working on Chase 2 Rabbits. Just yesterday I put a new note in my phone on Daggers of Crosswater. If you've been paying attention, I don't want to spoil it here, flippantly. It's a story about a bunch of criminals who are recruited to run security in a small town because manpower is a little strained. Gardea has an ongoing war. They call it the Hanging War, which is not in Gardea, but Gardea is running it a lot. Gardea also has to defend itself from the Symbol and also maintain power over the Estered, Iridia, Gwal, sort of Lao, but not really, and has a tense relationship with the Galahad Protectorate. The complications of the continent of Eleuthea. Meanwhile, in my head, I'm also slowly expanding more of what's going on the larger continent of Malastra, because that is where Odds went at the end of Four Finger Discount, and whenever/if I get to writing the follow-up to Four Finger Discount, which is called Fish Out of Water, I need to know a little more about what's going on in Malastra. Meanwhile, I still would love to run a D&D campaign in this world of Basara, but that's harder, because the more I try to think of how to run the races and the magic and everything else, I need new races. Well, I made them. New classes, and I sort of made them. It's basically reconfiguring and reskinning everything from 5th edition, or maybe 5.5 now that it's coming out. And then it's like, maybe I just want a whole other system, or take 5.5, borrow some stuff from, I forget what I was borrowing from, Iron Kingdom? No. Something had good stuff that I liked. It wasn't GURPS. I know it wasn't GURPS. GURPS is cool, but there's a lot. For something that is made to fit everything, and of course it's complicated. Basara is a weird world to run in something like D&D because they are industrializing. I see Basara in the present as it's a world with technology that is somewhat steampunk, but also very specifically not steampunk because they have their own thing that runs like floating ships, flying ships, called Blackstone. They have cars, sort of. They're at that point where most people still get around in like wagons pulled by animals or riding an animal. Not horses, at least in Eleuthea. Because if you ride a horse in Eleuthea, the Belroth might come murder you and take your horse. That's a whole other thing. When I wrote the first Gardea book, the Belroth were like this fun group of talking horses. I mean, they're not that fun, but I saw them as a sort of fun group that are just kind of there and they're weird. Now they're like this weird revolutionary group that's like, no, all those other horses are slaves and we want to save them. Most people still get around in carts or on animals, but there are what they call beastless carriages that you don't need an animal because it's got its own motor that aren't magical. Those are probably steam powered. Those would probably be more steampunk. There's also magic, and magic is weird. You would have the equivalent of a D&D sorcerer. There are these people with natural abilities. Some of them get recruited to be trained as book wizards, which are wizards. And then there's a more complicated system where people get experimented on to become even more powerful, and they become witch hunters. The witch hunters are dangerous and weird, and it's like villainous cult that forces people to be in it. Magic gets complicated that way. There aren't druids. There are people that can do like wild shape like a druid, but that's all they can do. They can't do magic. They're skinwalkers. The classes get changed, the races get changed, because you got the Weg, the Troll, humans, the Dwero, the She, the Nibweg, the Vani, the Nivani, potentially the Hoavani, but I don't think anyone would want to play them. I think it'd be a bad idea to play She as well. Different reasons. She are tiny, Hoavani are big. What else would playable races would be Clockworks, obviously. And then, because I do like the idea of Aasimar and Tieflings, I have the Anakim, which are both combined into one sort of corrupted version of another race. But putting all those races in their own terms, currently I have them sketched out in 5th edition terms, trying to be semi-essentialist, but also not about races. Like physical characteristics, it makes sense that the average Weg is going to be a lot stronger than the average She, because the average Weg is about 7 to 10 feet tall, and the average She is about 2 feet tall. So a strength bonus or a constitution bonus makes sense. Physical characteristics, I'm good with the average being up or down on something. And then mental ones not. Except for the Nibweg, there's a specific reason. No, not the Nibweg, the Nivani. The Nivani have essentially selected themselves to be much more intelligent because it's the only way they could survive next to the Vani. The Vani are kind of like mermaids, underwater people. They're not mermaids because they don't have tails, they have finned legs. The Nivani are kind of like halfling versions of that, and so they weren't going to survive except for the smarter ones, and then they created a culture that favors intelligence, and so they tend to be smarter. I think they're the only race I have that has a bonus on a mental stat. Those races I made took their traits from other races that exist in 5th edition. But all of these things are going on in my head at the same time, and I'm trying to get around to writing Chase Your Rabbits, and I was hoping to start it in June when summer started, and then I got a summer class. So that altered my ability to start it in June. And then after that summer class was over, I had gotten to the point where I realized the complications of fixing the plot for a detective story and it taking more time, and now I feel like I might not even get to it until winter break. And that's okay. So in the meantime, if you want to find me, there might be some one-off episodes here. But otherwise, come listen to the Groundhog Day Project, where I am almost to minute 7. It's a movies by minutes podcast. You know, each episode about a minute of the movie, except because it's Groundhog Day and I'm me, it's a little more complicated than that. I covered minute 6 several weeks ago, and minute 7 is going to be at least a couple weeks from now. Yeah, looks like I have an episode today on Heidi 2, episode next week about Danny Rubin, and then I get to minute 7. Keep following the show. It's got a Twitter, first syllable. Maybe I'll post things there, even if I don't put out an episode. It's got a Facebook page where you can go to the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. Or follow me on any social media, Robert E.G. Black, and you'll know what I'm up to. The show will be back with a season 3 sometime in the fall. I don't know exactly when yet, but I will announce it when I know. Anyway, to those few people listening, thank you.
Cut.
I should get coffee. Coffee would help me think. But I should write something first, then reward myself with coffee. Coffee and a muffin.
You're still here?
Okay, so I need to establish the themes.
It's over. Go home.
Maybe banana nut. That's a good muffin.
Go.